Okay. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining. So in true technology style, we've had a camera issue right before we're joining here. So I do apologize. You're going to hear my audio through this. But we do have video for Jean-Luc, and we're going to be getting started shortly. So and just give a couple more minutes for people to join in, and then we're going to get started. All right, thanks to everybody who's joining here. We are going to get started in a couple of minutes, so just bear with us and we'll get kicked off soon. All right, we'll just give it 30 more seconds and then we'll get started. Okay. All right. So I think we'll get going here. And again, just for those of you who are joining, you may be wondering why I'm not on camera. We've had a bit of a technical issue as we started, so unfortunately, I won't be on camera. However, hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. And I wanted to welcome all of you and thank you for joining today's webinar. So we've got lots of great discussion to have as we get into this. What I'm going to do is just to kick us off here, I want to just outline this. So this is actually the first session that we're running on several sessions as part of our Ask the Expert series. This is really focusing in on the topic of generative AI adoption in the enterprise. In particular, we're going to be talking about some of the data management challenges that prevent broader adoption and what can we do about those challenges. So my name is Simon McVeigh. I'm your host for this event. I lead the sales engineering team here at K2View. And I've been in enterprise cloud data management at this point for over 20 years. And with me today, I'm delighted to be joined by Jean-Luc Chantain. So Jean-Luc has been working in the tech industry for 30 plus years at this point. He's founding member and managing director of Verex Capital Advisors. And there, Jean-Luc advises high-tech funding community of VCs, private equity firms, and so on. He's an active advisory board member for several tech companies, including Lattice Flow, Liga Data, Samba Nova Systems, and of course, K2View as well. Jean-Luc is the former Global CTO of AI for Accenture. He's a holder of multiple technology patents and also the co-author of multiple white papers, including a recent white paper on the importance and the challenges of developing trustworthy AI, which is a perfect backdrop for the conversation today. So Jean-Luc, great to have you on the call. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Simon, for your kind words. And very happy to be here and have all these people listening to what we have to say. So let's get on a roll.
Absolutely, let's dive in. So the first place that I want to go with this is, I know you published a recent outlook on, some of the industry trends in technology over the next, as you see it over the next year or so. And there was one that really stood out to me, and I want to start with that. And it's that the rule being that the first law of AI will continue to be that bad data means bad AI. And before we dig into this, I think it's suffice to say that it's not news that bad data gets in the way of production AI projects, right? It's kind of the Achilles heel. But just to set the context here, I want to share two interesting stats from Gartner in terms of the deployment of AI, and this includes Gen AI as well. And the first stat is that only 20% of AI projects are actually being deployed at scale, right? Which is pretty staggering, right? And the second is that 30% of Gen AI projects will be abandoned before they reach production. And what's really interesting about this is in both cases, data is ultimately the issue, right? And so I guess the first question I would have here is, why do you think, after all this time, why are we still struggling so much with data readiness?
Well, one of the reasons is we have a lot of data, of course, and it's not stopping. It's not going to stop anytime soon. It's important to understand that if I look at an enterprise, your average global 2000, I would say, people that are very optimist are saying that 50% of that data is still dark, meaning that the value of that data is trapped. I think, unfortunately, sometimes it's way more than this. And inside, that dark data are both structured and unstructured pieces of information that AI could use, but unfortunately, because it has not been prepped or curated properly, that cannot be used. So we have to look at two aspects. One aspect is structured data, what comes out of your database, which if it's incorrect, bad value or improper value or missing value, et cetera, the potential prediction or the prescription you would make leveraging AI will probably be erroneous. If we look at unstructured data, this is slightly different. It's more about the value of the content that is being used in training, number one, but also in reinforcement learning or in fine tuning. With unstructured data, it's not as easy as structured data to figure out if it's good data or bad data. It requires some reading sometime of that unstructured data, but it's important because it could mislead the LLM at training time or at fine-tuning time, therefore getting bad answers, right? It's unfortunately, in both cases, quite an expensive process, more expensive with structured data than unstructured data, but still expensive. Why is it so expensive? Is because we need data scientists to be involved in the process of doing the feature extraction and feature selection inside the structured data. And those data scientists, well, they are not cheap, right? For a very good reason, right? Spend a lot of time in school. And about 60 to 80% of their time is used to do that data prep, which you can think as a janitorial job. So we use very expensive people to do a janitorial job on that data. And that's why in AI deployment, involving Gen AI or more classic AI, you see that very poor adoption in operation of the various algorithms that are being put in place. Usually we can put the finger on data.
Yeah. I mean, it's so important for the curation, but even beyond the training data. So let's imagine that you've perfectly curated your training data, and you've gone through that whole process. It is true to say that even after the LLM's been trained on all of that, if the goal is to support like real conversations to help real people, then the AI model is actually, the LLM is still going to be incomplete even after that training. Is that true statement?
True. That is a true statement. LLMs will have been trained with unstructured data. Generally, it's going to be, if it's a commercial LLM, it has been pre-trained. You have a foundational model that is supplied by either a service provider or a product provider. Both exist, but it comes with a pre-trained model trained on unstructured data. But this is not all there is into the enterprise, right? And also, none of those models know what's specific about a given enterprise. So it's necessary, right, even if it's just at the unstructured data level, to really go into that private data that the enterprise has, right, reach into the silos of information, right, and bring it up to give it to the LLM as a mean that to get more relevant answers, right? A relevancy of the answer to the question is of course critical, right? So you don't want a generic answers that come directly as out of the trained LLM. You want an answer that takes into account the specific of your enterprise. And that method is called, it's got a geeky name. It's called RAG, right? Which stands for retrieval augmented generation. You go retrieve information out of the private stores of the enterprise in order to enrich the LLM and the answer that is, or it's going to provide to the person that has asked that question. So it's just like fine tuning. It's all about getting relevant answers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad you brought up the topic of RAG, and you're right, it's a geeky name, but yeah, I know it's very much kind of in discussion at this point. So maybe before we dive in, I don't want to assume that everybody in the audience already knows what RAG is, or So I'll give a really quick example that I've definitely found useful. So you imagine your internet's down, right? And you go onto your service provider's website. Maybe you pull up an app from your smartphone, and you're gonna ask the chatbot like why your internet isn't working. And if you were to go to ChatGPT and you ask the same question, you're going to get a very well worded but relatively generic answer, right? It's going to essentially give you a reboot your equipment kind of answer, which in some situations is fine. But let's imagine that you had an issue with a payment method, or maybe there's a recent outage in your area that started just in the last few minutes. You want the chatbot to actually know that and be able to answer accordingly. And when we talk about RAG, that is really what it all comes down to, is that ability to provide the very latest contextually relevant data in answer to any question that you're being asked. So I have a slide here that we can use just as a little bit of a backdrop. This is a fairly typical RAG architecture that, if you go and search Google, look at RAG architectures, you'll see variations of this. And from a technical perspective, I mean, the flow here is actually relatively straightforward in concept, right? The user comes and types in a question. The retrieval model calls out to get that external knowledge that it needs. Then it's passing that back to the LLM and then back in to the user by way of the response. So I know there's a lot more that goes into a RAG solution behind the scenes, a lot of potential pitfalls as well. So with this, Jean-Luc, I wanted to ask you, when you look at this architecture, what are the most important aspects of RAG that we really need to pay attention to here?
Well, I think, as you show on that slide, it's important to understand that RAG is not just about getting unstructured data, right, to give relevance to the answer. It's also to look at transactional data, database data, structured data, right, or tabular data, whatever terminology you want to use. Because the life of the enterprise is one of interaction with people, therefore on transactions. So if I just look at the unstructured content, I get 180 of the answer, right? If I'm going to assume, I'm going to divide the 360 into 180 and it's structured, 180 is unstructured. I'm going to get half of the answer. So I need to get into the database, right, that contain, as you said, you use the CRM example, the current state of the caller, vis-a-vis that firm, has he or she paid their bill, or is there in their area an outage or something like that. That type of information is typically transactional data, and that's going to really make the answer way more relevant to the context and the moment of the question, right? So getting to understand that RAG is not just about unstructured, but also about the structured data, and it has to be done well. It's really important, right? And this is not something like a vector database that you prepared ahead of time is going to help you, right? We're talking here about true transactional data coming out of stores like an ERP system or other type of system of record.
Right. Yeah. So it's structured data, it's unstructured data, and I think the other piece is it's got to happen in real time, right? People don't like pauses in conversation. It's not a good look.
Yeah, it's not a good look indeed. Yes, we don't want a beach ball when we ask a question, and there are expectations, especially as we're increasing the use of those intelligent chatbot, that they should behave just like a human. They have to answer, quickly, and they can have that pregnant pause, as they call it in media, when there is a big space in the conversation. You can't have that. So the challenge is really, how can I get that information truly in real time, right? So every time I go to that system of record, I get that data. I can merge it with my with my unstructured data. I can create that new prompt, educated context based prompt, right? And give the answer. Now there is a bit of a issue with that thing on speed, is that the constraint of the store system that contains the structured data has to understand that there is a trade-off, and you could not. In fact, you don't want to make a trade-off. You really want to make sure that every component of your data pipeline that's going to be involved in your RAG process is really streamlined and optimized for speed and optimized for accuracy.
Right. So basically every link in that chain has to be able to operate in real time, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so I know a big topic that you've spent a lot of time thinking about is trustworthiness. So, what are your thoughts just when we think about RAG and this architecture and trustworthiness in general?
Yeah. So just for a second, trustworthiness is not a pass or fail thing. It's not a black and white answer. It's a set of capabilities that your models must abide to in order to give an answer that the client will trust. So what does it mean? Of course, it's security and privacy that everybody knows, but it's also fairness. It's also transparency, explainability, interpretability, auditability, and all of the entities that are there to make sure that the answer that comes out is not going to be unfair to a certain class of people, for example, or just plainly wrong. But that trustworthiness is key. So if you do RAG, you're going into the system of record. You could potentially getting data that is personally identifiable data, PII data, or PHI data, healthcare data, or PCI data, banking data. And as you're going to be moving this into the system, getting that data, which really has PII data, and got to give it to the LLM in a prompt, you have to make sure that you can, number one, so that what is protected data is either encoded in such a way, or masked or anonymized, so that there's no leak essentially of that information. This is really a critical thing. I have seen in the early days of GenAI cases where you would find PII data being sitting inside a now further trained LLM, because as you know, many of the LLM are keeping your answer in order to educate itself. And that's the wrong thing. And in fact, I've seen cases where they didn't know how to remove it out of that trained LLM. Right. So making sure that the RAG operation really is aware of the importance of the security of data, right, and the privacy aspect of that data.
Right, all the way through that. Yeah, and so I think just taking that a little bit further, I mean, it may be obvious in some cases, but why is actually sending sensitive data across this RAG architecture why is it such a big problem?
Well, it's a matter of number one, who is going to own the LLM, right? But say if you use a service provider, you don't really know what's happening behind the scene. They may be a great company, no offense to any service provider, right? But we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. So things that could happen could be, as I said, privacy information being leaked into that LLM. It could be intellectual property of your own company that suddenly, because the way that LLM has been used, allow that LLM to maybe keep sort of a memory of what it's seen out of your unstructured data. In that case, that's an issue. So that's and then there is the classic issue of copyright material that could be leaked into that LLM. So it's there's a lot of still a lot of challenge around that. In fact, I see many cases where people turn toward an in-house, generally open source based LLM. There are some commercial that are potentially installed in-house because they have I guess a reassurance, right, of minimizing the risk of that information being leaked. If the LLM is on premise, is it tuned by your people, trained with your material, or at least reinforcement learning or the RAG or the fine tuning is done with your data? You at least you have the impression, at a minimum, I'm going to say the impression, somebody's malicious, nothing's going to prevent that. But certainly that LLM will remain yours, right? And that information won't get leaked.
Right. And I mean, even if, let's say you brought it in-house and you're not using third party, I mean, don't you also have a risk that if let's say the RAG is making a real-time query to some of these back office systems, it's retrieving the customer data. There's also potentially a risk of one customer like seeing another customer's data in the response that comes back from the LLM, right?
Yes, that's unfortunately too common. We see it today in even on plain mailing system, no AI involved or anything like that, where you get an email, and it's about somebody else. Right? Yeah, that's totally a possibility.
Yeah, definitely. So I know obviously there's a lot of tooling that is already out there, in the rise of all the way from big data through to analytics use cases and, the evolution of the cloud platforms. There's a lot of tooling for a lot of different use cases, but why do you feel, or why are you seeing that the current set of data management tooling is not really up to the job of what we're having to do with AI at this point?
It is true that there's a lot of tooling, maybe too much. But I think the big issue is a lot of the tooling I see is not really focused on data quality and data preparation. I see some good tooling on data lineage, for example, or on data plain ETL and that kind of stuff that has made a lot of progress. But if I look at DQ, it is still a manual process, as I mentioned before. It is, without a data scientist that pays attention to the meaning of the data in context of the industry that is for that business, right? So they can decide if that data is good or not good. It's still manual, right? So not enough effort yet being made, in my view, by the ISVs out there to really focus on how do I truly automate data quality. And if we think of the amount of money being spent, time and money being spent on data quality, and the missed opportunity, right, on not getting that dark data out of the silos, right, is really why we don't see more of that AI being deployed. There's also issue around governance. I'm surprised to this day that we still see RFPs on data governance, right? We see RFP on AI governance, but that's okay in the sense that AI is new, so people think there's a different governance. I don't think so, by the way. I think you should have a data and AI governance process and suite of methods and potentially supporting technology, right? So that's an issue. And the last but not least, I would say is the fact that there are a lot of silos into the enterprise, right? Our world has been born of systems of record, right? We've all, codify the process with an ERP, an HRM, or CRM, or you name it, RM system with codified processes. They've produced a data exhaust, right? Which is what that's really what comes out of system of record. Is the exhaust, stinky exhaust, sometime of data, right? And that result in information about, say, a patient in a hospital being completely fragmented. So part also, I think, of getting better data management is a process one, is having a better storage strategy. I'm quite enthused in seeing data mesh, being sort of increasing in usage for the past 3 to 5 years, 3 years maybe, because it's not somebody bringing yet another piece of storage that's going to be better than the other guy, but it's really a strategy on eliminating data silos. And I think that's something you guys are, I know you guys are at K2V are very involved in that process of helping quickly create data mesh and the concept of data product that supports that paradigm.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know, we're having a discussion here, but we'll definitely be covering, that in more detail in future sessions, for sure. So, yeah, but agreed. I mean, it's still a very manual process in many cases, a lot of silos. So that makes perfect sense. Now, I want to just a couple of last questions, and we're going to go, shortly to our live Q&A as well. So definitely get your questions ready as we approach that. What about cost and scale considerations here? So, we just thinking about some of those implications with RAG and specifically with GenAI.
Yeah. So what specifically with GenAI, I would say in this case, what we're seeing in the enterprise is a lot of cost surprises. Where people try GenAI for XYZ solution, they find a great solution with it. They want to do it and deploy it at scale, and they realize, oops, it's going to be too expensive at scale. And that's really, really important. A company I'm familiar with, I won't mention it, save the innocent. They are full in GenAI, right? Strategically speaking, they've identified 10 use cases where GenAI could significantly make a difference for them, create value for their customers. They've only deployed 2. And the reason is the other 8, right? The ROI is not there. It's still better or cheaper in that case, if not better, cheaper to doing with human than deploying it with GenAI due to the cost of tokens being charged, in order to put the answer together. And that, as you can see, if you ask one question, maybe it's bearable, right? 2 questions is bearable. But if you are a big company, you have like millions of customers that could be asking that expensive question in terms of API calls, the ROI doesn't exist. So you're going to add to that that cloud is not that cheap at the end of the day, right? Especially for large company at big scale. So I'm seeing a lot of people moving also their AI, their GenAI inferencing in-house, right, in their data centers in order to minimize that cost. Because the cost, people always think it's about the training part. That's one thing, but really the big ROI problem is at inference, right? Which is when you ask a question to get the answer. And we need to slay that dragon. I'm not sure yet how it's going to happen, but that dragon is going to need to be slayed in order to prevent that cost that prevent deployment.
Right. And I guess even beyond the cost, there's the pressure that these things are, if you think about a chatbot that's being pinged, by multiple sessions, a lot of user queries, as we've seen in some of these production use cases, it's putting a lot of pressure on the production systems potentially as well, right? Yeah.
So your RAG system, by the way, you're making a good point. If you have to, you're ragging from your transactional system, in order to get that better answer, those also would be burdened by net new transactions, right? So you have to make sure that you scale your architecture of your backend system, in order to sort of protect them from that new load, right? That's gonna come into them. Absolutely.
Definitely, yeah. Great. Well, so just as a quick reminder for everybody, so we're going to open up. I've got one more question for Jean-Luc, and then we're going to open up live Q&A. So you can find that if you go to the questions section, and you'll be able to just type your question in into the tool there. So we'll see those come up, and we'll get to as many as we can. If there's any that we can't, we're definitely going to take a note of it, and we'll be able to reach out and follow up with that question. So, and then the last thing I'll mention is that you may have seen the poll. There's a poll where you can, if you're interested in finding out more about what K2View offers when it comes to RAG specifically, then definitely you can just answer that poll, and we'll organize a time to speak with you. So just wrapping up here, Jean-Luc, in terms of the discussion. So we've had, obviously there's a lot of obstacles still to be overcome. And this is moving at crazy speed, like AI speed. So everything that was new last week is already old. And it seems to be moving very unevenly across the enterprise landscape as well. So as you look out the next 12 to 18 months, and I know you're advising a lot of investors and founders and CEOs, in this area, like what are you advising them are the most critical areas to focus on as it relates to AI data readiness? So
when I answer questions, always in context in digital transformation, to be honest, right? Because digital transformation, it's got on top of mind. Most companies are into one or embarking into digital transformation. And of course, AI and initially was an ethics, but as we evolve, right, AI and GenAI are important enabler of the digital transformation. So what I recommend to most CXOs and CEOs that are getting into this is not to just do AI to do AI, right? Think of your digital transformation as a long-term commitment, right? That has to come from the board. So make sure that at the board level, they understand that you don't snap your fingers and digitally transform, right? That's important. Therefore, there will be an ongoing investment for a period of time, maybe 3 years, right? But that it's not something that is a one-time thing. The second thing is don't think of it as boiling the ocean. This sort of the old way of doing things. We're going to do a giant project. It's going to cost $50 million and life will be better after 3 years. That is not true, never was true, and it's no longer true. So think that your digital transformation has to be done in a land and expand manner, right? Tackle your problem one by one in a manageable period of time, 90 days, 120 days, your use cases, and then build on that success. And if you fail along the way, one use case fails, doesn't deliver what you want, move on, right? That should not stop you. There'll be another approach, and there'll be another use case that can create the overall value. So land and expand is the approach. Don't boil the ocean. One thing I see missing a lot of time in digital transformation is change management. Change management is absolutely critical to a successful digital transformation. People naturally don't like change. It's sort of a human thing, right? We don't like change that much. Even if we say we do like change, there's always something that says, should I? So it's a matter of clarifying the why of that digital transformation to every stakeholder, whether it's in the boardroom or in the factory, as to why we're doing this. So the change management is important. And then, of course, the digital supply chain has to be ready. So back to governance, data quality, right? Breaking down silos. This has to be put in place. And you don't have to do it all to start with. Every use case will identify a set of data set that you will need to prepare, for that use case, and then they'll be reusable for another use case. So as you go through your use case, make sure that for every use case you use DQ. At the end of the day, everything will be done properly, right? If you detect that progressive line and expand. And last but not least, trustworthiness, my favorite subject. Your answers coming from AI and from GenAI could have drastic consequences on people and on your company. So risk management is important. Trustworthiness of your AI answers is absolutely critical. It's not going to be a black and white, right? It's not going to be a pass or fail. You'll get a score. Let's say it's between 0 and 1, right? And that score will educate you, and your legal department, most of the time, will help you understand the risk and knowing if it's okay to to take a risk or not okay to take a risk, because nobody's going to have 1.0 as a score, right? Everybody's going to be somewhere in between 0 and hopefully closer to 0.9 than anything else.
Yeah, that's great. Some really great points there. So we're going to open it up for questions, and we've got a couple of questions that I'm going to just pick out here already. We actually got quite a few here. So the first one is from Preston Fay. So the question is, who is typically responsible for building and maintaining RAGs? Data scientists, data engineers, or other roles in the enterprise? And what are the typical skill sets associated with building and maintaining RAG systems?
I would say it's a mix of data engineers and data scientists. It's more computer science in some aspect of it than it is pure data science. But of course, there is data science. So it's a collaborative effort between the data engineers or ML engineers, whatever terminology we want to use, ML data engineer and the data scientist, right? Like everything today, nothing is marked black and white. So it's collaborative effort between both groups.
Great. There's another question here from Oren. So most of the examples given here were customer chatbots. What other implementations of RAG may be also popular? So like such as healthcare diagnostics, maintenance, defect fixing, and software. And then the final part is what are the current limits for other desirable use cases?
Well, of course, RAG is not limited to that user interaction example you gave. But for example, you see a lot of use of GenAI today in the marketing and communication space and PR space, so marketing, Marcom essentially, right? Where LLMs are being used in order to better formulate an email or a brochure, to more personalize that brochure to a given person, a given client. And you want to also RAG the information about your product, right? The LLM you're going to get, if I create a new gizmo and I have a whole user manual about my gizmo and it does a lot of good things, your LLM is not, out of the box, doesn't know about your gizmo. So you will need to RAG into the brochure, maybe the product specification and all that, in order to assemble an answer, right, for that email or that blog or that entry you're going to make. That's going to be not only relevant to that client request, but to that client needs, right? You'll extract out of what your stuff does, what the right benefit to express, through the email you create with GenAI. So that's one example. But the other you mentioned, they're absolutely there too. I mean, you could see in healthcare where you could have some generic LLM trained with healthcare information, but you are working in like rare disease, right? And you have a massive amount of information. It's domain that in healthcare is underlooked, right? So if you have rare disease, a lot of time It's a domain that not enough research being done by the big pharmaceutical because there's no money into it. But you may be specialized in those rare disease, and you want to make sure you can formulate whatever document you're writing and getting LLM to help you with that information about the rare disease that you're dealing. So just 2 examples.
Great. Some really good examples. Yeah, and we're definitely seeing both internal and external use cases that really go across the gamut for this. So we've got time for a couple more quick questions before we wrap up. One here, actually a couple just about the LLMs themselves. So what about data quality? I mean, is your view that we should be really cleansing and harmonizing all that data before it gets into the LLM? And I know there's maybe some differences between structured versus unstructured here. So
right. So for LLMs, it's really about making sure you're training with unstructured information that has been curated. Right? I mean, all the thing we see today is there's every day now there's an example of a chatbot that gets the wrong answer to somebody. I think Air Canada had an issue, and the other one was the the state of New York, with their business chatbot or something like that. If your LLM has not been trained with curated data, you will have hallucinations. I don't care how many guardrails they're going to put, right? Because guardrails are rule-based, and the anti-money laundering space has demonstrated when you got too many rules, nothing works, nothing breaks, everything gets stuck, right? So I see the curation of the data sets you're going to use for an LLM to be very important. And in fact, we're seeing now the emergence of small LLM that are very industry-based, that are specialized in healthcare or in finance or in supply chain, that are being trained with only data that come from reputable sources, right? So essentially curated, because they are deeper they're richer, I would say, in depths of knowledge about a given domain. So small LLMs tend to be curated with trained with curated data, as opposed to those giant multi-billion trillion parameter LLMs that are trained into the internet. But let's face it, I'm guessing that 50% of the information on the internet is just not right, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So it's important.
Exactly. So we've got one last question before we wrap up, and it's really just looking forward again. Where do you see the evolution of LLMs going over the next 12 to 18 months? Like, what are some of the key?
Well, I'm going to be a bit biased here. I'm a big fan of Jan LeCun, and he's written and has given some talks that are very interesting on the future LLM, which basically can be summarized that their LLM do not have reasoning. They are not going to have some form of reasoning, even if unless you're thinking of the reasoning of an amoeba, for example, before many years, and that scale is a big issue for them. So I think LLM would evolve in something that's going to be not as unwieldy, faster, and not as big as what we have today. But anybody who's got a crystal ball in the world of AI and thinks they can tell the future, I have that. I think
Right.
now it's so difficult to predict what's going to happen, because the rate of innovation is just incredible, and to me that's awesome, and come with risk, of course. So
yeah,
but I'm going to go with Jan that LLM, they're going to be replaced rapidly.
Yeah, so it's fascinating, and yeah, I think it's a good caveat that it's changing so rapidly. All right, well, look, this has been a great discussion. Thank you, Jean-Luc, for taking the time to join us, and definitely next time I hope I'll be able to to be on camera with you as well. But yeah, thanks for the time, and thank you
All right.
everybody to the audience who've listened into this. And yeah, we'll see you
Thank
on the
you all.
next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.